Calories are king for fat loss. We all know that. But if you only focus on how much to eat and you don't focus on when you eat, you are missing out on a powerful tool that can make fat loss feel substantially easier. And in this video, I'm going to be breaking down the 3 key nutrient timing related habits that you need to be focusing on if you want to make fat loss feel easier and more sustainable. Let's get right into it. So the first habit that I actually want to talk about is the importance of breakfast consumption. And now before you skip the episode or click away from this video if you're watching on YouTube, let me take a second here to talk about why this matters so much. Okay. The thing is, most people just think about what to eat. They don't think about when to eat. But in many ways, when we eat also influences what we eat. When we look at nutrient timing, particularly breakfast consumption, there's pretty good science showing that higher consumption of food earlier in the day helps regulate hunger. Okay, so if you have a large breakfast, you're going to feel less hungry throughout the day. And in part, it's because you are aligning your eating behaviors with your body's natural circadian rhythm when it comes to hunger regulation. So in the morning, we tend to have higher levels of something called ghrelin, which is the hunger hormone. So it makes sense to align our eating patterns with our body's normal circadian rhythm of hunger regulation. In addition to that, typically, whenever we have a big meal, we feel pretty full and satiated for 4 to 5 hours after that, right? So it makes sense that if you have a large breakfast, strategically, you're going to feel full for a good 4 to 5 hours after that, which might take you into 1 to 3 p.m. depending on when you consume breakfast. On the opposite side of that, if you have a really small breakfast, you're going to feel pretty hungry throughout the day. If you have a really large dinner, yes, it's going to make you feel satiated after the dinner, but we'll talk about the downsides of eating a really big meal before bed anyways. But you're not strategically taking advantage of that satiating effect of having a big meal earlier in the day. Beyond just hunger regulation, there's also really good science showing that people who consume a larger portion of their calories earlier in the day, aka having a large breakfast, have higher energy expenditure as well. So it's not just about regulating your hunger, it's also about helping you burn more calories. And part of that is likely due to the fact that if you're consuming more food earlier in the day, you have slightly more energy. Maybe you inherently or subconsciously move a little bit more, right? You guys have probably heard of something called NEAT, non-exercise activity thermogenesis, and it's simply the calories that we burn from day to day due to just small movements, right? If I'm fidgeting here, if I'm moving around, I'm going to be burning slightly more calories than if I was just sitting still. Right, so we're likely to move a little bit more, burn slightly more calories if we consume more of our calories earlier in the day, because again, it's just providing energy earlier in the day. There's really good science showing that skipping breakfast can lead to higher hunger and cravings later in the day. So if you're somebody who tends to oversnack at night and you're like, man, I'm going to eat less throughout the day so I can afford more calories at night, but you still find yourself overeating at night. And even worse, the more you restrict your food intake through the day, the more you find yourself overeating at night. I would highly encourage you to try to consume a well-balanced breakfast, a well-balanced lunch, and ironically, that helps with hunger regulation at night as well. Obviously, skipping breakfast, if you're hungry at night, that's going to lead to poorer food choices as well, right? Because who really has a healthy meal at 9 p.m. when you're watching some Netflix? Probably a very small percentage of the population, right? Most of us are just going to our pantry, grabbing some snacks, grabbing some ice cream, watching some TV, and mindlessly eating because we feel hungry. I want to share with you a really, really cool study published in the Journal of Obesity in 2013, okay? And this study took overweight and obese women who had metabolic syndrome. And metabolic syndrome, if you're unfamiliar, there's a host of criteria that you have to meet around blood sugar regulation, blood pressure, triglycerides, waist circumference, all that stuff. So these are women that are relatively unhealthy. And they separated them into 2 groups. Okay, both of the groups ate the same number of calories per day, which was 1,400 calories. However, one group was consuming most of their calories at breakfast, so they had 700 calories at breakfast, and then 300 calories at lunch and dinner. And the other group was the opposite of that. Okay, so they had apologies, it wasn't 250 at lunch and dinner, it was 700 at breakfast, 500 at lunch, 200 at dinner. Okay, so it's skewing towards less food at night, and the other group was the opposite of that. 200 calories at breakfast, 500 calories at lunch, and 700 calories at dinner. But the important part here is that both groups consumed the same number of calories, 1,400 calories, for a total of 12 weeks. And you would assume that if the calories are the same, all of the outcomes are the same. And that just was not true at all. First and foremost, hunger regulation was substantially better in the group that consumed the large breakfast. Okay, so all of these participants were asked to rate what their hunger was, and those that consumed the larger breakfast on average had 31% less hunger. Right? That was just self-reported. But that was also corroborated by ghrelin levels and leptin. So they measured blood biomarkers, things like ghrelin and leptin, which are specific hormones that are associated with the regulation of hunger and appetite. And what they saw was that those that consumed a large dinner, okay, so ate few calories earlier in the day, had substantially higher ghrelin levels over the 24 hours and over the 12 weeks compared to those that had a higher breakfast. Okay, or a larger breakfast, I should say. So the self-reported data on hunger regulation aligned really well with the blood work, essentially, that they were looking at to tell what the different fluctuations in hunger hormones were. Now, you might be thinking, okay, not a big deal. Like, they feel a little less hungry. So what? So what is a really important point, right? Because not only did they have better hunger regulation, they also lost substantially more weight. Okay, so the breakfast group lost on average 8.7 kilograms of body fat, and the large dinner group lost on average 3.6 kilograms of body fat. And you might be thinking, how the hell is that possible? Well, there are a couple of things here. Okay, so first and foremost, I talked about earlier that breakfast consumption is associated with greater energy expenditure. So yeah, the people in the breakfast group probably burned slightly more calories, but I don't think that accounts for the big differences in body fat that we're seeing here, because it was twice as much body fat that was lost in the group that consumed the large breakfast. And the truth is that there are some limitations to this study. For example, energy expenditure was not directly measured. They didn't measure how many calories the participants burned, right? And in addition to that, caloric intake was self-reported. So they didn't actually measure the caloric intake of these individuals. They were just told what meals to consume, how to do it. They had education, but they were essentially free-living individuals that did this on their own. So these are limitations of the study. So what likely happened is that those that were in the dinner group were so hungry that they were actually consuming more than 1,400 calories, or just more calories in general than the breakfast group, which has been corroborated by a number of research studies. So it's very, very likely that the group that was consuming breakfast, since they had better hunger regulation, were eating less calories naturally. And funny enough, even though the dinner group was eating more calories, not only did they see less fat loss, but they still felt hungrier, right? So it's like a lose-lose kind of situation. And I think this study is really cool because it shows us how important behaviors are, right? When we work with clients at Fit for Life Academy, we focus a lot on behaviors because behaviors matter. We focus on developing healthy habits around nutrition because if you can simply make some of these slight modifications, it makes it easier to lose weight. If you are somebody who has been trying to lose weight and you feel like you know how to cut your calories and you cut your calories, but now you feel hungry all the time, you have cravings all the time, you overeat at night, you can't stop thinking about food, you're not losing weight, you're frustrated, it's likely because you're not focusing much on the behavioral stuff, right? And so focusing on the behavioral stuff in addition to focusing on building muscle through resistance training is really where the magic happens. And it's why I really think, and this is not supposed to be a commercial for Fit for Life Academy, but I'm such a strong believer in what we do. And this is why I really think that our approach is so different than so many coaching programs, because we mainly work with people who have been frustrated with their health and fitness for a long time. And we're able to help them because we understand the science behind this stuff, right? We understand the science of nutrition beyond just eating less calories. We understand the science of optimal body composition improvement to make fat loss easier. And most of this stuff is behavioral. It's not just about telling somebody to eat less calories, because again, in theory, that's what they need to do. But all of the behaviors influence how easy or difficult it is to do that. Now, the second habit I want to talk about here that's really important is having consistency. Consistency with your eating, not just when you eat, but how big your meals are too. And I'm going to talk about some really cool science here. But there's really cool science to show that eating at consistent times really trains your hunger cues, right? We see that ghrelin rises in anticipation for meals. So if you're typically eating your lunch, let's say around noon, you probably feel really hungry about around 11:50, maybe even 11:30 if you didn't have a big breakfast, right? Because it's your body knows that that's typically when you have lunch. So it's going to increase ghrelin levels. Your stomach's going to start rumbling. You're going to feel hungry. You're going to want to eat, right? So eating at regular times helps us train our hunger cues, but beyond that, it makes your appetite more predictable as well. You're not just on the road and you're feeling really hungry and now you don't have anything with you, so you need to grab some fast food, and now the fast food is 1,000 calories and it throws you off your calorie limit. Again, behaviors matter, right? So regular eating, having a regular eating schedule is really, really important. It also helps you prioritize when you're going to be eating, right? Like if you know you have your breakfast at 8, lunch at noon, dinner at 5, then you have a snack maybe before bed, and you have that consistent schedule, now you can build consistency around that. You can prepare your meals, you can either bring it to work, but you have a plan, right? Aside from the regulation of hunger, aside from the training of hunger cues when it comes to having a regular schedule, a big benefit of having a regular schedule and having consistency with that is your ability to prioritize your nutrition, right? So let's go ahead and talk about a really, really cool study here published in the Journal of Nutrition Research and Practice in 2001. And what researchers were looking at here, essentially they took data from a ton of weight loss studies, okay? So they took data from over 600 women who had participated in commercial weight loss programs that lasted anywhere between 4 and 24 weeks. And what they wanted to see was what sorts of behaviors were associated with more weight loss in these women. And the behaviors that they were looking at were specifically around mealtime regularity, or not mealtime regularity, I should say food or eating regularity, because mealtime regularity is one variable under just eating regularity. This is what I mean. Mealtime regularity simply means eating at the same times every day, right? So breakfast at the same time, lunch at the same time, dinner at the same time, whatever. It doesn't matter if you have 2 meals, 4 meals, 6 meals a day, as long as you're being consistent with whatever your sort of schedule is. And the other really interesting variable that they looked at, and this was news to me when I read this study as well, I actually didn't know about this, is caloric intake regularity, meaning how consistent is the caloric intake at each of your meals across days. So are your breakfasts typically the same size? Are your lunches typically the same size? Or do you skip breakfast today, have a big breakfast tomorrow, then have a small breakfast the day after, then skip again, and you don't have regularity with the size of your meals, okay? Here's what was really, really cool, that both of those variables were associated with better weight loss. So people that had more regularity with their mealtime and had more regularity with their caloric intake across days experienced better weight loss. So those that ate at the same time each day lost on average like a kilogram more, which is about 2.2 pounds, compared to those that didn't. And those who consumed similar calories also lost about 1.1 kilograms more than those that didn't. So that's about 2.5 pounds, which is actually quite substantial, right? So think about losing weight anywhere between 4 to 24 weeks. If you focus on these two behaviors, that could be an additional 4 to 5 pounds of fat loss, simply because, again, these behaviors contribute to it being easier to stick to a calorie deficit, be more consistent with your diet overall. Now, the researchers here of the study actually speculated a couple of cool things, and they mentioned that it's likely that eating at consistent times, similar to the breakfast habit, helps reinforce circadian alignment, right? So aligning when you eat with how your hormones fluctuate throughout the day, specifically hunger-related hormones. So when we talk about circadian fluctuations, it just means that specific molecules, here we're talking about hormones associated with hunger regulation, fluctuate throughout the day. They might be high in the morning, low in the evening, or vice versa, but it just follows a natural circadian rhythm. So we're aligning our eating behaviors with the natural circadian rhythm of hunger regulation. Eating at regular times and having regularity with your eating overall can reduce chronic swings in appetite and caloric intake, right? Again, if you typically don't have regularity with your meals, so you don't prepare, now it's 1 p.m. and you have crazy hunger pangs, you're going to eat whatever is available because you're really hungry, and it's hard to make smart choices when we're hungry, right? So those are some really cool benefits of having regularity with eating. Again, doubling down on this concept that focusing on habits and behaviors is equally as important as focusing on your caloric intake. And I think that if you don't have the basis of a healthy and sustainable diet when it comes to the specific behaviors that I like to talk about around food choices and nutrient timing, it's really difficult to stick to a calorie deficit. And I would encourage you to focus on the behaviors before even trying to reduce calories. I was actually just talking to one of our new clients not that long ago, and she was like, man, I pretty much fast all day because I get so hungry at night. So I don't eat all day, and then I eat around 5 or 6 p.m., but then I way overdo it. And no matter how silly I know, like she knows that her behaviors are not contributing to her goals, right? And her thought process is just like, well, if I'm not doing this correctly, if I'm not able to regulate my hunger at night, then I need to like actually eat less throughout the day and eat less throughout the day so I can, so that my behaviors at night aren't that impactful. And it's like, no, you need to do the opposite, right? You need to have a larger breakfast. You need to be more regular with your meal schedule and not skip meals, because that helps you regulate hunger and satiety and actually makes it easier for you to stick to a natural calorie deficit. Now, the last behavior that I want to talk about here, which is the opposite of having a big breakfast, is to reduce late night food consumption. Okay, a couple of things here. Typically, when we eat late at night, it's unplanned, right? Most of us want to stop eating after dinner. And here's the thing. I know that a lot of these things are easier said than done. You might be thinking like, man, yeah, I know I shouldn't snack at night, but how the hell do I actually do that? Well, you do that by focusing on some of the behaviors that I'm sharing here that help you regulate hunger so you're not starving at night. I've shared other behaviors around food choices in other episodes of the podcast as well, so I would encourage you to go check those out. But late night eating is typically unplanned, which means that we're not like having a meal, right? It's typically high calorie as well. It's more emotion driven than hunger driven for the most part, right? So we're probably having snacky foods, high sugar, high fat foods, hyper palatable foods. Typically we do really good with our caloric intake throughout the day, and then we overdo it at night, and that puts us overboard. And then that's where the big frustration and struggle is for a lot of people, right? In addition to that, late night food consumption is associated with poor sleep quality. This is very well documented. If you're having a large meal an hour or two, maybe even 3 hours before bed, especially if you're somebody who may have digestive issues, it messes with your sleep. And sleep is so important for hunger regulation, for body composition, for energy expenditure. So it's kind of like a double whammy. It's like you're making all of these bad food choices, and then on top of that, you're screwing up your sleep. And if you screw up your sleep, you're going to be hungrier the next day. You're going to have lower energy expenditure the next day. If you're hungry, you're going to eat more calories. If your energy expenditure is lower, that means that you're likely going to be in a surplus. And since your hunger is higher and you have cravings, you're going to choose naturally more calorically dense foods. And now you might repeat the same cycle where the next day now you're eating a lot at night again because you're hungry. Now you have poor sleep again, and it kind of just like perpetuates. Right? So that's why this behavioral stuff, again, is so important, because it sets you up to actually be able to execute on the things you want to execute on. I always tell clients there's a difference between knowing what to do, theoretically, and then actually implementing it into your own lifestyle in a way that's healthy and sustainable, practically, right? And a lot of the stuff that I'm sharing here is the practical stuff that's really important, because most people know they have to eat less calories, but when they try to do it, they can't do it, and they can't figure out why. And a big part of it is this behavioral stuff, right? So I would encourage you guys to really focus on eating more food earlier in the day. Have a nice large breakfast. If you can have 30 to 40 to maybe even 50 grams of protein with that breakfast, maybe 5 to 10 grams of fiber, 1 or 2 servings of fruits and veggies. Focus on mainly whole foods. If you do that alone, it's going to make it so much easier for you to reduce your caloric intake and work on fat loss. And your energy expenditure is going to be higher. There's going to be better hunger regulation. You're probably going to eat less at night because you're not going to feel as hungry. If you're eating less at night, you're not going to be throwing off your sleep. If you're not throwing off your sleep, you're going to have better hunger regulation the next day. You're going to have greater energy expenditure. It's going to be more favorable towards body composition. Sleep's really important for recovery from exercise as well. And as you can probably tell, I'm speaking really fast because I talk about this stuff over and over and over again. But it's because it's that important, right? So those are the 3 really important behaviors, guys, that I would really focus on when it comes to nutrient timing if your goal is to optimize your diet for health, but also body composition, especially if you have goals around fat loss. Have a nice large breakfast. Again, follow those recommendations that I shared around protein, fruit and vegetable consumption, fiber, etc. Make sure you have regularity with your eating, when you eat every single day, but also how big your meals are. Like, you shouldn't, just because you have breakfast every day at the same time, it might not be as consistent as we would like it to be, right? Because if you have a small breakfast today, large breakfast tomorrow, there's inconsistencies there with the caloric intake or the size of the meals across days. So focus on regularity there, and then limit late night eating. I hope this episode helped. Again, if you are a regular listener of the podcast, I appreciate your support a ton. Share this with a friend who might benefit from it, especially if they've been struggling with fat loss. I think this is one of those episodes where it's like a small couple of key nuggets that if you implement it actually has a pretty big effect. And again, thank you for supporting the show. If you haven't already, please take a second to rate and review the episode. It does help me a ton. And I look forward to catching you in next week's episode. Peace.